it made me feel so alone. And then by the time the next loss happened, I was like, oh, okay, this is how you deal with it. You just shut it off and don't talk about it. And once you get through those 5 grieving stages, you're at acceptance and it's over. My dad at 15 years old, he was elderly, so I lost him to encephalitis of the brain, and every year after that until I was 21 years old, I had a subsequent loss. And so it just resulted in a lot of compound grief and a lot of grief that really affected me over a long period of time, but that I avoided. And so it was really hard to deal with my dad's loss and deal with like losing a friend and a pet or a family member. And by the time I was like 25, 26, I just realized that I had all this grief built up for the last decade and I had nothing to show for it. And also I didn't know how to handle it. So I ended up going to therapy and really working through a lot of those things. And now it's brought me to this really wonderful place where I've opened an advocacy center called Grief is Good. And I help people through their compound grief and also help them plan for a good death. And so it's brought really beautiful things in my life, but it was a long, tough journey to get there.
So you were 15 when your dad died, you said?
Yep.
And then just multiple deaths after that every year. What was the experience like at 15 for your dad dying and then going through that and then immediately having another death after that?
It was crazy because nobody at my age understood, and even people older than me, even like my teachers, they didn't know what to say to me. And I just walked through school so awkwardly because I felt like I was walking on eggshells around people and that I didn't want to upset anyone else. And it just made me feel so uncomfortable that I held it in. And I was like, oh, well, okay, so that means that you don't talk about it and you don't, share it with even older people than like even my teachers or my mentors and guidance counselors, like even they were uncomfortable with it. So it made me feel so alone. And then by the time the next loss happened, I was like, oh, okay, this is how you deal with it. You just shut it off and don't talk about it. And once you get through those 5 grieving stages, you're at acceptance and it's over. And so that's kind of how I dealt with it. But I would say the hardest part was feeling that loneliness of not being able to talk about it and my peers not knowing what to do.
Is that something that you could relate to, Ashley?
I definitely feel like people were like a little bit weird about it in terms of like teachers and, things like that. Like I have like one like weird memory of my high school or my elementary school principal. Like I must have gotten my nails painted for her funeral. Or it might have even been like 2 years later for like when my dad got remarried, his wedding. And like, she just was like, we weren't allowed to have our nails painted at a Catholic school. And she was just like, oh, I'll let you keep that nail polish on just because I know like blah, blah, blah. And like, I just like literally 10-year-old me, 11-year-old me, whatever, like remembers that, like, which is really strange to me. But I think I literally just talked about this in the episode we recorded yesterday or Friday, but like my whole elementary school class came to my mom's funeral, which I feel like is like a beautiful thing, but also like, I don't know, just like really odd in a way. And I think that was also like kind of a way in which like, we don't know how to handle this. You know what I mean? Like they literally got field trip forms signed to come.
Yeah, that's so weird.
That is so weird.
Like we were going to the Strong Museum. Like that's the same thing that we do to go to the Strong Museum. They got to like go to a funeral.
Part of me is like
like
glad.
It's a beautiful thing, but
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Because like they did see that I was obviously like super upset, like in a very like shitty place, basically. So I feel like in a way, like I do look back on that and I'm like, it was weird, but it wasn't weird. Like it was kind of nice that they were all there to support me in that time. And when I came back, like, I do think that like kids are just like kind of resilient in the sense that like, I don't know that they didn't talk about it, to be honest. Like, or I feel like I just remember people being like very compassionate and like remembering like, oh, Ashley doesn't have a mom anymore kind of thing. Cause like, that's also what probably, they were probably told like Ashley's mom died, passed away, whatever their parents might have told them. But, and I don't really remember adults like being too weird about it. And I was in a lot of support groups or a support group. So I kind of remember like being like it being okay to talk about it. And even growing up, like we always celebrated like birthdays and death anniversaries. And like even when it was her 50th birthday, we celebrated that. But I think personally, I just don't like never really like to talk about it like with people that had not experienced it or things like that. Like within my family, I feel very comfortable talking about my mom and like her dying. But as I got older, I definitely like didn't like open with, you know, my mom's dead.
Yeah.
Right.
How did your family handle it, Katie? Everybody at school made you feel like you had to walk on eggshells? How did your family handle it for you?
My family was they were just all really upset. So I was like a people pleaser. And I'm sure that my dad dying didn't help this, but I just didn't want to disturb anybody. So I just kept it to myself. And I was like, well, my sisters are upset and my brothers are upset. Like I saw my brothers cry, which I'd never seen before. And I'm a little background. My brothers are 30 years older than me. So they were always like very like stoic people and never cried, never showed emotion. And so going through that and watching them break down was really difficult because it made me feel like, well, if they're crying, I can't bring my sadness to them because, you know, I don't want to make them more upset or whatever. So I just held it all in. So the whole theme of it was me kind of boxing it up inside of me and not wanting to let it out or release it. But I do remember, it's so funny you're talking to Ashley about the painted nails because I remember one thing that happened and I was leaving math class. It was my first day back and this girl who I didn't really get along with, she just came up to me and walked right next to me and was like, hey, I have the notes if you need them, but no worries if not. And I was like, okay, great, thanks. And she just walked with me and she didn't say another word and she didn't ask me how I was doing. She didn't say I'm sorry. She just stood next to me. And I felt like when people ask me, how do you hold space for other people? That's the example that I give. And like this like intuitive 15-year-old that just knew that I didn't want to talk about it and just knew that I just needed somebody next to me to walk the halls so I didn't have to do it alone from that one class period to another. But my family in general, I mean, they're very supportive people and it took us a while to realize like how to celebrate my dad. Like now we celebrate what we call Papa Stock and it's on his birthday and every year we try every year. We fail sometimes as people do, but we celebrate and we have like this big family party and have games and that's like a really beautiful thing.
I do feel like I did like hold some things in at times for like the sake of other people's, like not crying so that other people didn't get sad or things like that. Like, because another memory I have is like it was probably at her 10. There was an anniversary of her death that fell on Easter, and I feel like it was 10 years because like my aunt, like my uncles wrote us a letter. Her brothers, like I still like literally have like the letter, and my aunt put together this little like photo book or whatever. And like I remember my dad being like, "Yo, like you could fucking cry, like you don't have to hold it all in." So I feel like there was just different like periods that I probably went through. Thinking back on it, like I feel like I did have an outlet, like because we went to like grief counseling, like a grief group, even before she died. And when she died, we created like these little memory boxes and like put things we remember. So like there were channels in which I did have that I, you know, but as the person that I am like more of a private person. So I definitely like did hold things back and I'm a bit of a people pleaser. I don't like saying people pleaser actually, because I feel like that has a negative connotation. Like I like to make sure the people in my life are happy. So, and not at the sake of my happiness, like, but I like to make sure that like everyone's happy because like we're not promised tomorrow. So like, you know, that like it kind of all like circles in that, like, I don't know. Sometimes it's like, I feel like I didn't grieve, but at the same time, I'm like, I did like the right things that you should do, I guess.
Right. Like the checklist of.
Yeah. Like I do not think that I followed the 5 stages of grief and like knew I was going to get to acceptance. Like that was like, I don't know if I was just lucky or like, I just like didn't fucking care about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and her little 5 stages of grief or whatever. But like I never, like that was like never something that I just like had in my head. But I do remember going through periods of time where I was like a little bit more like private about it and a little bit like more vocal about it.
And you went through, I feel like, a lot of anticipatory grief, sounds like. So that a lot of people have like struggles with, they feel like they didn't grieve after the loss actually happened because they've experienced grief for so long that like when it happens, they're like, oh, almost a little numb to it.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I kind of knew it was going to happen or something like that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I definitely had that experience.
Yeah, I feel like CJ, you would have had you've talked about that a little bit. Like I saw her getting more sick. Like she had a hospital bed in her room that she was like then sleeping in. And I feel like I did talk about this. I was just reading transcripts from other episodes. But like there was a photo though that I saw like not that long ago. My aunt showed it to me. And she was like so sick. Like, I mean, seriously, it was crazy how ill she looked at like one of her last birthdays. And like, I do not remember her looking that sick.
Yeah.
Like I kind of remember her, like I do remember like the final days, like in her just being in bed and like basically fucking comatose, like for the lack of any better word. But like, I don't remember her being like that ill, like on a birthday. Which is, you know, probably just like my brain being like, yeah, we don't need to remember that. It's fine.
Right, right. Just shutting it out.
Yeah, 100% self-protection. But I think the idea of like holding space to harken back to that girl who kind of just walked with you. I heard like there was one of my kids had a friend who essentially did that in the way that they knew how. And I thought it was incredible that like this child could understand what was needed, and basically like the conversation was around the death of my child's mother, and the friend was like, I feel sad for you and I just want to cry with you if that's what you want.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just so interesting to me that like kids are so much more intuitive on how to hold space than adults. And it's like we just want to fix the other person so we don't have to feel that. But kids are so much more open to just feeling what the other kid is feeling. It's pretty amazing. But having said that, so you like, it sounds like you had some of those experiences, but basically nobody ever told you like or gave you permission that it was okay to grieve. You know, so I can imagine that starts compounding with just the normal teenage stuff that happens that we go through. And then what is that next death that you have?
So the next death was my cousin who was really close with my dad. And so that was hard because then I had to re-grieve my dad and found that it was like difficult to, like, every loss after that got harder and harder because I had to re-grieve the people that I'd lost before that. And then ultimately I lost my dog, and that was like the hard, it sounds so silly because my dad is probably the most important person in my life, but my dog was the hardest loss to get over.
Oh no. I feel like I feel the same way, and I haven't even lost the dog yet. I feel like I'm gonna be like, no, it just like she's only 7, but I feel like my world will fucking end when this dog, like when a day comes. Like I've lost dogs before, but I feel like there's just some dogs. It's like it's like people, like there's some dogs, some people that you have such a connection to.
Right. I'm literally just going through it right now. Actually, I just lost my dog 3 weeks ago. And
oh my gosh.
Yeah, so she was my best friend, and she ended up being rehomed with her brother because I couldn't deny how happy she was with him when I was moving to California. And so I just watched her live this second life with her brother, and I visited her every time I was home from California. And it was just, we just had, I don't know, she saved my life at one point, and we became so close that letting her go once was hard enough, and then losing her, and she was only 6 years old, so losing her a couple weeks ago, it just like my world ended because I was so, you know, you don't expect that to happen, especially that young of a dog. And it's the same thing, like it's that that abandonment like comes up for me, and that fear of abandonment, and like, oh wow, this thing was so important to me and it left my life again, and now I have to like rebuild without it. And so every loss I have is just that compound all over again, and I have to like go back to therapy and work through all of this stuff.
Yeah.
And it's fucking annoying, to be honest with you. I wish
I am literally going through that right now where I'm just like, I fucking put in so much work. Can I just take a breather? But
Yeah.
no, like, no,
Can I have a week?
just
Can I
keeps
have a month?
fucking coming
A
up. And
year?
I'm like, I'm tired. I'm
Yeah.
just tired. Just let me fucking breathe for a second. And it's that same thing, right? Where it's just like, oh my God, I feel so good. I fucking worked through all that shit. And then you're like, oh goddamn, there's another fucking trigger. And
Yeah.
here we go.
Yeah. Call your therapist. You're like, it's me again. Damn it.
Yeah. Really? Already? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
All these vacations I'm buying for my therapist, all the money
Right.
I'm giving to them. You mentioned that your dog saved your life. Would you be able to talk a little bit about what you mean with that?
Yeah, so I went through a breakup. We had 3 dogs. We lived together. We were together for years. And we decided that 2 of the dogs were bonded. So he would keep 2 of the dogs and I would keep the 3rd dog. And the 3rd dog is the one that passed away recently. Her name is Freya, and she's a Tibetan mastiff, which, if you don't know, they look like a small bear and they're like very aggressive and have a lot of behavioral issues. So I was like, yes, I'll keep the difficult one. And so we moved into this like not tiny, it's an awesome apartment in Buffalo. And I just was lost. Like, I didn't know how to go through the breakup. Like, we weren't meant to be together, and he really hurt to me and lied to me, but I just wanted that stability back in my life, and ended up becoming like very depressed, and like I just had no will to live for the days. And especially after like I tried to get back together with him and he said no, and I was like, man, like, you lied to me, like, you you know, you're the one that messed up and I'm the one trying to get back together and getting denied. And so I just like went through this really hard time in life, and I had to get up for her. I had to wake up. I had to take her to the park. Like, she had to be exercised, and I had to get outside, and I had to go to work to like be able to afford to pay her bills. And she just really saved me. Like, she gave me purpose, and I don't know what my life would have ended up if it wasn't for her in that moment.
Yeah. And I asked this only because I had a similar experience with my kids. Did you know in those moments that she was essentially saving your life, or was it you were just going through the motions?
I knew about like halfway through. Like, once I started recognizing like my resiliency and trying to like play on my strengths and see myself as strong and things like that, that's when I was like, oh, Freya's getting me out of bed every day, and I should not be such an asshole to her. And like, I should like walk her more and like not be frustrated, because she is a really difficult dog. And like, you know, people come to the door and she wants to attack them, and I had to put her through training and relearn how to help her and all this stuff. And it made me like be mad at her for a little while. Like, why do you have to be so difficult at such a hard time in my life? And then after we got through like the hard part, it was like, oh, I had to go through that because I needed something to do, and you gave me that something to do and something to focus on. And now I work with like behavioral issue dogs, and she just like opened up my whole world to training and things like that. And so I'm a dog sitter on the side and work with dogs that like can't like stay with anybody else, with like normal people, because she like couldn't stay with anyone. I didn't trust anyone. So
I had this big resistance in me because it was like communicative, like, oh, well, it's good that you have the kids because they're going to help you get out of bed, blah, 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 blah. And I got really fucking angry when people would tell me that. Because I'm like, well, how is it good that my kids just lost their mother? And how is it good that like I have to take care of these humans in the worst fucking moment of my life? But as I kind of go through this process, I do recognize now that whatever it is, there has definitely been significant change in my life that I've pursued, and healing that I've pursued because of them. Would I have still pursued it without them? I want to say yes, because it feels shitty to be like, no, I would just fucking give up and, stay in bed or worse. But it's interesting to hear like that same perspective kind of reflected back to me of like being able to admit like, no, there was this important thing in my life that helped me. So you keep mentioning this compounding grief where you've had loss after loss after loss. At what point did you start acknowledging all of this grief and what was happening, and what was that turning point in your life? What did you do?
Yeah, so there was a few that kind of led up to me realizing everything. One was I was in college and my best friend, had stopped talking about my dad and anybody that died. I thought that's what you did. And that was part of me like boxing it away. And I was just like shooting the shit with her. We were talking about what her plans were or something. And I was rifling through clothes on the floor, I remember. And I was like, yeah, my dad used to blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, sorry. And then I tried to change the conversation and
Wow.
she was like, no, you can talk about him. And I just kind of paused for a second and then continued on with the conversation. And it just like changed my life. I was like, oh, somebody just gave me permission to talk about him. And that was a huge moment. And then I had a dream about him where I walked into like this bar and he was in the corner and I was talking to somebody in my dream and I looked around and I saw him in the corner and I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. I can't talk to you. My dad is here and he's not. I can't see him in real life. So I like left
No
the
way.
conversation and went over and talked to him and gave him a hug and like said all of the things I needed to say. And that I mean, I've told this story probably like 20 times and I just got chills
Yeah.
because that moment was so profound to me. When I woke up, I just cried. And that's when it really opened my eyes to this idea of like dreams being new forms of communication and new memories with people and ways to heal and move forward. And then I was dating the ex that we had 3 dogs with, and I used to talk to my dad all the time because then I got used to like talking about him and talking to him. And my ex, when we were laying in bed and he was like, hey, I don't mean to like push your buttons or anything. And I don't want to bring up a sore spot, but do you mind if I tell you something? And I was like weirded out. And I was like, yeah, sure, go for it. And he was like, I don't think that you've ever grieved your dad before. And I asked him what he meant by that. And he goes, well, you either act like he never existed in your life or you act like he's still here. And I don't think either of those options are healthy. And that's when I went into therapy. And I was like, well, you're not wrong. So those 3 things kind of changed my perspective on like, wow, maybe I didn't ever grieve my dad. And maybe I remember Googling Kubler-Ross model and being like, what to do to grieve? And like, being like, okay, well, I bargained. I was in denial. I got mad. And so I checked all the boxes and I moved on. And I thought that's what you did. And so I was probably about 25, 26 when I had that conversation with my ex. And so it was about 10 years after my dad died. And that's when I went into therapy and started working through all these things.
No way. Holy shit. Do you still talk to him all the time?
I do a little bit. I feel like I've cut it down a lot, but I just talked to him last night actually in the car. And it feels really healing for me, but I have different intentions with it now. Like now it's more like therapeutic and I can just, it's like it's like me talking back to myself almost and not pretending that he's right there. And I think that that's a little bit more of a healthier way for me personally, like that, maybe not for everybody, but for me, it's just like, what would dad say right now? Like, I feel like I need a bracelet that says that or something. And that's kind of my goal in saying it out loud of like, what would he respond rather than, oh, he's right here listening to me and he'll send me a sign and I'll figure something out.
Oh, wow. And that shift happened through the process of working through your grief?
Yep. Yeah.
No kidding. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting because I don't know what the relationship to my wife is, because obviously right when she first died, it was, or I would say at least the first year was very much like me trying to relate to her, like she was still physically here. And at the time, the therapist I was seeing was like trying to challenge me and saying like, you really need to redefine what that relationship is with her, and like see it as this, insert some adjective related to spirituality in there and redefine what that is. So that's when I tried to like shift my thinking from like, okay, now like I can still have that connection with her because we had such a strong and deep connection while she was here. And like to the point where I could feel what she was feeling and experience what she was experiencing. And when she would get pains from her cancer, I would get the same pains, obviously less intense. But so to lose that connection was like fucking devastating to me with everything, even with everything else. So I tried to redefine what that was and what that connection was. And I think I'm still trying to do that. But I do still talk to her like she can hear me, though I know that if anything comes back, it's like me reflecting it back to me.
Mhm.
And I also don't believe in signs, but at the same time, I like try to be open to signs. So I'm like in this weird like purgatory of like none of this is real, but also I'm going to treat it like it's real, but also it's not real, but also maybe it is real. So it's just interesting to hear how you've like redefined what that is and how it feels healthier to you now. And it kind of challenges me a little bit. It's a little bit of a mirror for me to maybe figure that shit out.
Yeah, I mean it's hard. Like it takes a long time to redefine, and it's interesting that your therapist like phrased it like that, because it's like it's
Hmm.
exactly what I did without knowing that that's what I did. And
Right.
now I focus more of my energy, like if I want quote unquote signs, or I want to be open to that, or I want to have my connection with him, with his actual like not spirit, but like his entity somehow, that's when I really focus on dreams, and I try to like think about him before bed, or journal about him, or write a letter to him, or talk to him, and meditate. And then like sometimes I'll be able to like facilitate having a dream with him. And that's helped me a lot, because that feels like a neutral space where I can interact with him, and he's like
Mm.
quote unquote there, but not there. But like it's, yes, a figment of my imagination, but it's at least somewhere that he exists. And I can separate that from like the real plane.
I've always wanted to have dreams. I've only had a few in the beginning and they were just miserable and awful and terrible. So it's
Yeah.
definitely my subconscious like trying to deal with it. It was always like she was back and I'm like, "What the fuck are you doing? I thought you were dead." She never talked ever. She was always just quiet. And then there would be like just like demonic entities all around us and we'd have to like fight our way through it. And that was almost every dream that I had, which was I could count on one hand.
Yeah, that's really common though. Like it's so common to have horrible dreams right at the beginning or for the first year. And it's exactly what you're saying. Like it's a reflection of your subconscious, because you probably are dealing with some anger, or,
Yeah.
regret, or whatever the case may be. And
Or
that's
both.
reflected back to you, or both, right?
Yeah.
And more probably. And
Uh-huh.
um, so it's hard, because it makes you, a lot of people have said like, I don't know, I didn't want to dream after that point because it made me
Yeah.
more upset. But once they're open to it, if you can open yourself back up to it and have like a nice dream, it's like finding a gold coin. Like I can't
Mm.
explain like how refreshing and nice it is to like wake up from that, and you immediately cry. You're like, oh my god, I'm so sad they're not here anymore. But then you smile, and it like lifts you up through the day.
Have you ever gone to mediums or any type of spirituality thing to reconnect with him or no?
I try to about like once a year actually,
Okay.
because I like need that in my life. But
Yeah.
I just want to hear from him, even if it's something really small. But so I just went a couple months ago and saw somebody, and they like had really cool things to say. And I have to say, like, I'm becoming an end of life doula, and
Uh-huh.
I
It's amazing.
yeah, it's super exciting. And was applying for this scholarship, and I told her in the session, I was like, she's like, I picture you working with a population, but it's not kids, because I'd just written a kids book, and she's like, it's some other kind of population that means something to you. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense to me. And she was like, well, I picture it happening. You're going to work with this population very soon. You have to go to school for it, but it's going to happen. And I walked out of that appointment, and in the parking lot got a notification that I got the scholarship.
Oh,
And
wow.
so, yeah, so I was like, okay, thanks, Dad. Like, I appreciate that one.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so I do that a lot. I consider myself like a pretty spiritual person, and that's important to me. So it's like part of my ritual every year.
I have had one memorable dream of my mom that I remember like very vividly to this day. And then I know that there has been like times where she's been like part of a dream, but like not like the main focal point. Like we'd be having a family party and like she was there, but like she wasn't like, she didn't like kind of similar to you, CJ. She didn't necessarily like talk to, not like specifically talk to me, which I feel like I had like the mecca of all dreams. So now anything that comes after it, unless it's like that, you know, like that level of dream just is like shit.
Yeah,
like,
agreed.
But I don't know. Yeah, I don't know that I like actually, I don't know. I feel like I don't actually like call out to her as much as I used to, maybe. I don't know if that's just like because it's been like 22 years or something. So that dream happened like 2 years ago, and I was like, probably the best thing that's ever happened to me. Like in the world of grieving, and my mom, obviously, not in my life, but would be a high bar. I mean, it was pretty good. It was pretty good. But yeah, I just wonder if like during she'll come, and I would appreciate this versus like having it be so often, like in different seasons of my life. Because like I've talked about this before, which was like it was at a point where like I had like just met my boyfriend. I was kind of like trying to decide if I was like, it was a little bit before me actually deciding whether I was going to move back to London or I was going to stay in Buffalo or stay back in the States and move to Buffalo. And it didn't like make me decide either way. I still went through a very long decision-making process, or long for me. But it was something that I was like, it was just an interesting timing of like, you know, I kind of was like at a point where like, I actually wasn't really sure. Like I'd always been very sure of like, graduate college early, I'm going to move to Atlanta. Like, and everyone would be like, don't you want to think about it? I'd be like, no, like I'm ready. I'm just going to move. Like if I don't like it, I'll come back. So it was at a point where I was like, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. And so I don't know, like when I get married or when I become a mom, like will it come up then? But I also think my like whole grieving process, like grief will be different for me in those moments too. Mm-hmm. You know, it kind of comes back to the surface in some ways, you know, like she's not going to be there to like pick out a wedding dress with me or like see my first kid or, you know, those things. So a long-winded way to say I have had one dream and it was great. And I cherish it to this day.
So jealous of you guys. Maybe I'll try to.
I feel like yours is going to come, CJ. It took me fucking 20 years. Yeah. I had to wait 20 years for the mecca of all the dreams.
20 years? I'll be so fucking old by then.
Yeah.
I'll be pushing like late 50s.
The more you talk about it, the sooner it'll happen.
Yeah, I know, right? We do keep talking about it. So like,
yes,
that's why CJ asks that question all the time.
I do. Like, please
Ariana, give me a dream.
Yeah. Like, Ariana, do you fucking hear this? Like, come on. I have like, but there is something about where I'm like, if she has any sort of who she was here on Earth, I'm like, she's not going to come. Like, she's just going to be like, no, it's just going to hurt you too much. So I'm just going to stay away. Like, in some ways, it's very much like her to be like that.
Which is also beautiful in its own way.
Sure.
Like, maybe you're not going to get a dream
right.
for that reason.
She's going to be like, you got to
No, seriously.
I know, I'm serious.
Like, I didn't know my mom well enough to be like, she's going to stay away and she thinks she's going to hurt me.
Yeah.
Like, I was 9 years old.
Do you think that that's like a projection?
I think it's just me trying to explain why the fuck she hasn't shown up yet.
Sorry.
I do. So like with the medium thing as well, I've had a lot of people, well, relatively speaking, a lot of people encourage me to go. I have had experiences outside of a medium that felt very real, but I'm still really scared to do that because I'm just not sure. So I do wonder if there's just a part of me that's just still not quite ready to be open to the fact that maybe I can hear from her, or that there is something out there for me to hear. I also have a fear that if I hear from anything that is outside of this physical realm, it's going to be, hey, just need to let you know you have a tumor growing in your body and you're going to die in 6 months. So you should go figure that out. Like, that is my default, is that if I hear any news from anything, it's going to be horrific news about me. So
Well,
there's also that kind of holds me
yeah.
back as well.
Yeah, I mean, well, that would be debilitating for me. Like, that would scare me too.
Yeah. So, there's always that. But I'm interested in, because it sounds like you have decided to work with this population that we have all found ourselves in. I know why me and Ashley have chosen to do it. It's something I was doing before my wife even died. So I'm very curious what drives you to want to serve this population, as well as what is your reaction to and protection from hearing and experiencing death over and over and over and over again?
Yeah, that's a great question because it's so important. And like self care is like the epitome of helping people
Mhm.
in death care because you can't show up for anyone unless you show up for yourself. And so in my end of life doula class, we actually go through this best 3 months coaching, and we have to do it for ourselves first before we can practice on
Mm.
anybody else because they want you to work through all your biases and all your traumas before you
Wow.
can like open space for other people, which is really, really deep work and has changed my life. When the first time I took this class with my mentor, and that was before I like wanted to be a doula, and I just wanted to take this class because I was interested in death and so and grief, and it's really taught me that the protection comes from like your own, I guess, like what grief means to you and your own definition of spirituality, and like
Mm.
how to stay strong in your beliefs while holding space for others and their beliefs, and welcoming like different traditions and different ideas of death and ideas of afterlife, and then knowing that yours are true to you and that's important to you too, without having like project those on other people or without having
Mhm.
other people's project onto you. So just like having a really strong foundation in what you believe is really important. Self-care is really important. And for me, it's like the downtime. That's what self-care means to me, is just like after experiencing a death or her talking to somebody about like a heavy grief, like I need to just watch New Girl.
Right.
It really is what
Such a
it
good
is.
show,
Like
by the way. Yeah.
it's such a good show. And that's my downtime, is watching New Girl and laughing at Winston and his cat and like finding joy in
Yes.
like little things like that, and going on TikTok and like realizing why I am the way I am. Like those are a couple of things that help me kind of detox from the heaviness of grief and death. But I'm actually starting up a program in Buffalo uh, to sit with the dying. And so that's going to be like a big part of it, is like teaching people how to sit with the dying and like
Yeah.
how to take care of themselves after a long day of being around complete death, like and the end of life right there, and it being really sad. And that's kind of where I'm going to go with it, is just practicing that self-care, doing meditations, doing grounding work and things like that.
That's awesome. And I think it's important. I know we kind of laughed through it, but watching New Girl or TikTok or these things, like, I think it's important to call out because I found myself doing the same thing. I still find myself doing the same thing. And at least in the circles that I have run in, or the content that I consume, it's always like TV and social media and all these things are distractions and you should never do them. And like, there is a portion of society that demonizes all these things, even outside of like what we're talking about here. But I think it's important to call out that there are uses for entertainment, and it was the same thing. As soon as my wife died, I hated rewatching shows. Never could do it. Ever. As soon as she died, like I think I have rewatched like The Office, New Girl, Workaholics. Like I've rewatched all those shows that I used to watch that I loved and laughed at 3, 4, 5, 6 times now. Like they're always on when I need a break. And it took me a while to give myself permission to be like, hey, this is okay. And even when my wife was sick, we dealt with our grief and her dying, her cancer, through comedy and laughter. So that's always been really important to me. But yeah, I just wanted to call that out because I think it's important that people can have that permission that like these things are fucking useful and it's okay. And we don't need to demonize them at all.
And you're absolutely right. Like there's such a like stigma of social media, and it's social media can be like beautiful and great
Yeah.
and connecting, and also just like a reprieve from everyday life. Like it's helpful. Like yes, we get addicted to it, and it affects our mental health, but in moderation, like it's
Yeah.
really helpful and useful. But I so resonate with you on the comedy thing because so my mom has lung cancer, and when we found out about 7 years ago now, we thought she only had like a year or two to live. But when we found out it'll be 7 years ago in January, that night we were like, okay, we can handle this. Like, we'll be there for you. We'll set up appointments, blah, blah, blah. And after about like an hour, my sister was like, okay, so what color wig do you want? Do you want an afro? Like, have you always wanted purple hair?
Yes.
And like, we talked about wigs, and like, it became like this like joke. And it was such a relief to be like, okay, we're still human. We
Yeah.
can still laugh. Like this weekend, I'm grieving my dog right now and going through a breakup, so I'm like double griefed up right now. And so this weekend I decided to take a break and go out and like gave my permission to myself to be happy and like dance to music and smile and take pictures smiling. And I posted the pictures today, and I found myself like almost like this hesitancy to not post because I'm like, what are my ex's family going to think? Like, everyone's going to think I'm not sad enough or this
Yep.
or that. And I was like, no, like, I deserve to take a break from my grief.
Yeah.
I deserve to feel happy and not feel guilty about that. And that's like the message that I put out there today, because I found it was like that guilt was right there.
Yeah. I had the exact same experience, or do. I think I'm like starting to come out of that. Whereas like giving myself permission or feeling judgments from people or whatever other projections, where it's like we're not allowed to have happy moments. Or what I also experienced was, if I have happy moments, is this denying the pain that I feel and
Mm-hmm.
everything that my wife went through? Where I was like, okay, so I have to just be miserable 24/7, or else I am not suffering enough because she suffered so much, and I will never suffer physically the way that she did. Well, I mean, I very much could, but like right now I'm not. So it was that experience of I'm not allowed to, but I've definitely come to a place where I'm learning better to be able to be like, okay, I need to put this up on a shelf for a little bit and just either be with my kids and just laugh with them,
Mm-hmm.
or go out and be okay smiling and laughing. And I wonder if it's our capacity to hold it, because like you said, it's like our grief will never go away, but it's just that capacity that grows to hold it. As that capacity grows, does that then allow us space to go out and enjoy life or laugh or whatever?
Yeah.
So there was something else you mentioned in the very beginning. So I know you are training to be a death doula, but there was something else that you were also doing right now.
Yeah, so I'm doing the best 3 months coaching is something that I'm doing that's helping people prepare for the end of life, and that's what I'm doing through my death doula practicum right now. And then I do advocacy work on podcasts and through social media and magazine articles about how to create new memories with your loved ones. Dreams are
Mm,
obviously a really big part of that. And then the third thing I'm doing is writing a book. So I just got a publishing deal that I'm pumped about, and so I'm writing a book
nice.
on like how to love your grief and accept it into your life and welcome it, and how to live a beautiful life with it around you.
All right, that's awesome. The one thing that we do ask everybody before we end is, what advice, and you've given us tons of advice, but what advice do you have? In this instance, I want to focus on somebody who's experiencing compounding grief, because I think we've had a few guests who have had that experience where it's this significant amount of grief that just keeps compounding. But what advice would you have for that person to kind of interrupt that cycle and start dealing with that?
Yeah, my advice is to start journaling about what that grief feels like to you. So I always say pick up your grief. Like imagine you're holding it. What size is it? How heavy is it? What color is it? Is it sharp? Is it round? Is it smooth? Like what does it feel like in your hands? What texture is it? Does it make you angry? Like what are your reactions to it? And journal about what it feels like to you outside of your physical body before you put it back into you. And then once you absorb it again and you feel it inside of your body, then what kind of reactions do you have towards that? And write down all of the things that you're grieving. So whether that's a loss of a relationship, a job, identity, a pet, a loved one, all these different forms of grief can like re-trigger us over and over again, especially in compound grief. And so like how writing down your different relationships with grief can help you see like, holy shit, like I've experienced a lot and maybe I need to start to journal about this one more, or I didn't realize I was grieving this, or it just can help kind of turn over a lot and start to recognize what our grief looks like, and that becomes a little bit more manageable then.
I'm very appreciative. We are very appreciative for you coming on. It was super insightful, and appreciate you kind of opening up a little bit about the things you've gone through and sharing some things that you've done. And I know that it's definitely going to help a lot of people who listen in. So thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, well, thank you guys for having me. This has been awesome.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Day After. You can find this podcast and more at our website at www.thedayafter.com. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd really appreciate it if you take a moment to leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcast.